for Diversability. I am a Caucasian woman with dark black square glasses with long dark hair, and I am wearing a blue shirt. And for those of you that do not know, Diversability is a community that is dedicated to amplifying the stories and voices of the disabled community and the allies who support us. And we are so excited to be hosting 5 very diverse and unique panelists today for our Diversability Unplugged event for April, which is Deconstructing Ableism and Inspiration. So before we get started with the question portion of our event today, I want to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves briefly, and then we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Carly, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hi, I'm Carly Finlay. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia, and I pay my respects to Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging. I'm a guest on their land, and they've been telling stories here for over 60,000 years. And I also acknowledge that while there are lots of awful racial atrocities going on in America, they're happening in Australia too. And it's really important that we acknowledge that and the inequity and work to understand First Nations cultures more and respect and keep First Nations people safe. So I am a writer from Australia. I have 2 books. Can I show you? This is the first one. It is Say Hello, and it's I should describe me actually first. I'm a woman with a red face, short dark curly hair tied back, wearing a floral jumper with 2 brooches, a flower and a cat, and the brooches are both purple. The cat is in the flower. And my book is called Say Hello. It has a photo of me on the cover and with an orange text and black with Say Hello in orange, Carly Finlay in black. And also the most recent, which I'm even more proud of, is Growing Up Disabled in Australia, which is an anthology of stories by disabled people. 46 people have told their stories in this book. And the book has a cover that is very colourful with white text that says Growing Up Disabled in Australia. I also work as Access Inclusion Coordinator for an arts festival in Melbourne at Melbourne Fringe. And I write and speak and do a whole heap of things. So I've got about 3 different things work-wise to do today. So my life is always very busy, and it's good that things are picking up here as we emerge from the pandemic, although we're still in the pandemic. And I hope, I'm really excited about this because I've admired many of the panelists for a long time, and I've gotten to know the ones that I didn't know yet over the last 2 weeks. So it's very exciting to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today, Carly. Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Sure, I am Daniel Hodges. I am a Caucasian man. I've got a white shirt, blue tie, awesome black fedora, if I do say so myself, and a quirky sense of humor. I am finishing up my law degree at the University of Baltimore School of Law, and I am president and co-founder of Pieces of Me Foundation. And we spell pieces, P-E-A-C-E-S, because we are not broken, but we are trying to help people find a way forward in their circumstances to thrive. And I'm happy to be here and be among these incredible panelists. I am blind and also have a connective tissue disorder. So I've experienced a lot of different limits that we're talking about internally and externally, and I'm just happy to be here.
Fantastic. We are super happy to have you today as well. Haben, would you like to introduce yourself next for us?
I would love to introduce myself. My name is Haben. Full name is Haben Girma. And I'm here in the San Francisco Bay Area talking to you from my living room. I'm a Black woman, long Black hair. My family is from Eritrea and Ethiopia. There's a lot of violence happening right now in that region, a civil war. And lots of people have told me to shut up, don't talk about politics, just talk about disability. That's ableism. It comes up in so many ways. So I'm glad we're gathering together to talk about ableism and work on removing it from our society.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to hear what you have to say today. Wesley, would you introduce yourself for us?
Yes. Hello, everybody. This is Wesley Hamilton. I am the founder and CEO of the Disabled But Not Really Foundation, a local Kansas City nonprofit organization that helps instill a physical limitless mindset that breeds courage, confidence, and competence. You might know me from season 4, episode 2 of Queer Eye, or newly recognized as the 2021 CNN hero for my philanthropy work. Outside of that, I do motivational speaking. I'm a mover and shaker, really over here in the world, and want to push out positivity and inspiration, as well as uplift people from the communities that I represent. So I am proud to be on this panel with so many amazing people. This is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
Fantastic, Wesley. Thank you so much for being here. And our last panelist, Jacob, would you please introduce yourself for everyone?
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Pacheco. I am the young man up top wearing an off-white shirt and with the headphones in. I was born with cerebral palsy. I am a content creator, motivational speaker, and entrepreneur. I own a personal brand that I've built and developed for the last 5 years. I travel all over the world, bringing the message of empowerment and inclusion as well to everybody across the world. I also surf professionally as well, and it's something that I really enjoy. But mainly, I'm all about building community, like a lot of the panelists are on here today. I'm honored to share the stage with all of you, and thank you to everybody who helped put this together and the interpreters in the audience. And it's great to have you all here and everybody from all over the world. I see a bunch of people from Croatia, Australia. It's great to have you all here. Happy to be here, and I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine again. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Before we get started with the question portion for the panelists, I did want to let all of our attendees know that after our panelist question portion, you all will have an opportunity to ask questions of the panelists yourselves and connect with the panelists. If you have questions and you're worried about whether or not you'll be able to have all of them answered or anything like that in case you run out of time, I encourage you to type your questions in the chat as we go along, as you think of them. Our project manager, Whitney, is going to be typing all of those questions in a document for me so that we can keep track of those, so that when we get to that portion, we can ask those and get that section started for you guys. And yes, we will be recording this session so that if you want to revisit the event, or for those of you who have to leave early or aren't able to make it for whatever reason, weren't able to make it, you'll be able to attend asynchronously as well. So with that being said, let's start talking about ableism and inspiration. So this question is going to be a general question for all of our panelists, and I want to know, ableism is experienced differently by each one of us with disabilities. We all have our own unique experiences with ableism. Can you tell us about a pivotal moment where you realized that ableism even existed? I think we all have a moment where we realize that ableism exists, and it usually comes from an experience of our own. Can any of you speak to that?
I'll go ahead and go first. This is Jacob speaking. I have one that I'll share. I was just about to graduate from graduate school at Long Beach State, put in a lot of work, wanted to work in professional sports. That was a lifelong goal of mine ever since I was in high school. Put in a lot of work, was working at Division I sports and a professional sports franchise at the same time during this time. Right before I graduated, about 3 months before, I realized that my potential was going to be capped, not by something that I could control, because I went to 35 straight interviews and I never got one phone call back. And I couldn't figure out why until it became very clear that when a superior told me that I did not have the ability or experience to work with athletes. And then it became very clear in these interviews that I started doing that I couldn't control how people would respond to the way I walked or the way I looked. And that was one moment that really kind of set the stage for where I'm at today. So that's one experience that was pivotal for me that caused me to pivot and change into what I'm doing now. So it was great.
Yeah, it's Carly speaking. I think my first experience was when I was in my first proper job outside of university, probably about 2 years into my career in the public service in the government in Australia. And I was not really enjoying the work or understanding the work. I was doing something that was very numbers based, and I'm not numbers and systems based at all. And I was quite sick as well. My skin kept on getting very sore, and I would just end up in these cycles of, being in hospital or not enjoying the work, not being good at the work. And I remember talking to my manager, who just had no idea about this skin condition. I think the whole office just thought I was, making it up to get out of work. And I said to him, can I work 4 days a week? Because I think 4 days a week would be all right for me rather than 5, so I can have rest day and I can recover, and I think that might keep me out of hospital. And he said no. And I said, why not? And he said, this can't be a part-time role. And I said, but there's other part-timers here. I said, if I had a baby, could I go part-time? And he said, yes. And I said, I am 23 years old. I don't have a partner. I don't want a baby at the moment. I don't understand why I couldn't go part-time. And later, very many years later, like 15 years later, I'd say, when I signed on to work part-time in the arts, the first thing my manager gave me was this form from the government, a different agency to what I worked in, to say that if you are disabled, you can request part-time work. And I had no idea until I was until I made the choice to do a part-time job. So that would have been the first time, probably 2005, that I realized when I was about 23 that I was experiencing ableism when I wasn't provided the same opportunities as my colleagues.
This is
Go ahead.
all right, cool. This is Wesley speaking. Honestly, I think my whole life I've faced some type of ableism. I know that ableism comes in so many different ways with so many different definitions, but I just pertaining to the things that I do, I'm in a fitness field. And so a lot of people didn't expect those with disabilities or some type of limitations to be active. And so I remember just the moment I acquired my disability, I was overweight, or what I would determine for myself as being overweight. And just nobody told me that I could be physically active. And when I tried to go into facilities, they didn't really know how to work with me because they didn't think that I was capable of doing all the things that I do now. And really the work that I do now is based upon that of the limitations that society has put on us, of what they think that we can and cannot do. and using that as strength to show them that we're more than what they define as disabled, you know, and more than what our limitations are. They are just that. They are, but that doesn't stop us from doing things. So briefly, that's kind of like a best way I can put it. And I am, just for those that don't know, I'm a Black disabled man, and I do have a shirt that says my color is seen before my disability. So just to pertain to ableism, like I said, I faced it, you know, my whole life just because of what I represent. This is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Daniel. I'll go ahead, and I've had faced ableism in manageable forms, I'll say, prior to 2008 when my daughter was born. But when she was born, we ran into a situation where there was no getting around it, over, under, etc. We had dealt with hospital staff who simply could not get their minds around the idea that blind parents could successfully parent a child. And we had done all the training courses, we had shown them alternative techniques. And because we knew that there was a chance that our daughter would be born with retinoblastoma, which is a rare form of eye cancer, we had even gone so far as to coordinate referrals and make sure that even those aspects would be taken care of. Long story short, she did end up getting the eye cancer, which we successfully treated, but we ended up dealing with Child Protective Services at the same time. They actually beat us home from the hospital and later told us in our file they had been referred simply because of the blindness, no other indications. And so we found ourselves dealing with a child with cancer and Child Protective Services simultaneously, simply based on the ignorance of a few hospital staff. And this is Daniel, and I'm done speaking.
So my next question, this is Catherine speaking. Many don't recognize their own ableism. You know, each of you shared a story of when you kind of discovered that ableism was even a factor in your lives. And especially in the non-disabled world, a lot of people don't even recognize ableism. So how can we as persons with disabilities make others aware of their own ableism while also setting the stage for meaningful change?
This is Daniel. I'll start off with a quick story again. My mentor, Elisa, who I think is joining us tonight in the audience, and I had been working together for a few months when we had started looking at different job opportunities. And she said, well, why don't you consider going to law school? And my response was, I can't. I've got too much chronic pain. I can't do this. I can't do that. And she challenged me to look beyond and do some self-reflecting. And, you know, here I am 4 years later, a couple of weeks away from graduating, saying I really was caught in my own ableist mindset of what I could do, what I couldn't do. And when I finally took a moment and asked what I wanted to do instead of limiting myself to my own doubts, that's where the doors really started to open. So I think in general, being aware of our own ableist thoughts, our own, I think, growth trajectory really helps. And it helps us also be more empathetic with those who do want to learn as they progress on their own journeys, because none of us has it completely figured out, I imagine. And if we are aware of that and meet people where they are and help them progress in a way that's always moving forward, but understanding human frailty of thought, then I think we're going to be heading in the right direction. And this is Daniel, I'm done speaking.
I love that. This is Catherine speaking. You know, meeting people where they are. Anybody else have any thoughts on that from our panelists?
Yeah, it's Carly speaking. I grew up I was born with my skin condition, and it's always been severe. I've always experienced levels of discrimination and ableism. But because I didn't see anyone in the media that looked like me when I was younger, this skin condition is very rare. I saw disability in a very different way. I saw it like people who were Paralympians, for example, or people who were on the awful tabloid TV shows talking about, reporters talking about how they're supposedly rotting the system. And that's a terrible representation of disabled people, an untrue representation. And so my experience of disability was really narrow. And so I rejected the term because I didn't think I was disabled, because I didn't see anyone like me, and I thought it looked a certain way. I thought it was a certain experience. And it was only until I was in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, so just over 10 years ago, that I started meeting a lot of people who were disabled and also writing and speaking about my own experiences. And I realized that I am disabled, and I had to shake my own internalized ableism.
I know there is a slight delay with your typist, Haben, but can you give us your perspective on how we as persons with disabilities can help those that don't understand or recognize ableism to do so?
Haben speaking. There's a delay, definitely, so I appreciate you giving me a chance to speak. I'm deafblind, so I am getting all of this information typed up in Braille, and that's a bit of the delay. I grew up deafblind. I did not know an organized deafblind movement when I was growing up, but I knew of the organized blind movement and the organized deaf movement, and I had opportunities to hang out with both groups. When I hung out with the blind community, I would hear things like, oh, deafness would be the worst thing in the world. I can't imagine not being able to hear music. And then with the deaf community, I'd hear similar examples of ableism and how blindness would be the worst thing in the world. And because I exist at this intersection of these two different experiences, I was able to realize early on that there's ableism, there's systemic discrimination, and it's often internalized, and we need to work to remove it. For me, one of the most impactful things for learning to move past ableism is to have cross-disability experiences, engaging in organizations and activities where you meet people with different disabilities different from yours, so you can learn about their experiences, beliefs, accommodations, and strategies. That's empowering. Non-disabled people should also have similar cross-disability experiences. That's really powerful. We'll also see that people are in different stages, as we heard earlier. It's a journey, and we need to show patience and compassion for disabled and non-disabled people who are early on in the journey of learning about ableism.
Catherine speaking. That's a really, really powerful perspective to have, to not only have compassion for ourselves, but compassion for others. I heard a quote once, and I'll share it. Leave room for the imperfect ally. Can any of you share your thoughts on what that means to you and the importance of the imperfect ally in dismantling ableism?
It's Carly. I think that we're very quick to dismiss those who don't get it perfect, or don't understand. And I understand that everybody is on their own journey, and but I feel like things should have progressed a bit more around ableism and disability and access and inclusion. I think that we really do need to meet people where they are and welcome those people that are willing to be allies into our community and help teach them as best as we can. But I also think we do need to set the bar high as well around being an ally and who can call themselves an ally.
This is Wesley speaking. Honestly, that's a good question. I just like Carly said, I do think sometimes we probably dismiss our allies pretty quick when they don't get it right. But at the same time, it's 2021 right now. So if you haven't got it right, it's a problem internally as well. It's your views that you need to fix and reflect on yourself. I wanted to make sure I said that because I know I acquired my injury at the age of 24. So prior to that, I know I probably was, pushing out ableism because of lack of knowledge. And, so for the work that we're doing now, I mean, it was bad where I couldn't even accept my disability at the beginning stages. And, for me, I had to be able to see it differently. And I had to be able to start to educate people as well. So I think that when we talk about the imperfect ally, it's the person that's willing to listen and understand and actually move forward and start to speak for us when we're not around. I know I speak for a lot of people of different, within a whole disability community, just because of the work that I do. And I think, I don't want to get your name wrong, but I want to say Haven. Ooh, don't. All right, Haben, right? But same thing that she was saying.
Haben?
Yes, Haben. I got you. I got it. But literally, I think that for us, we have to be able to educate. We have to be on the forefront, and we have to just be able to, those that we're working with, we have to just let them understand what we're going through, and they have to be willing to be around people that are different than them, because I think that that's how you learn. That's how you can be a voice. I mean, again, I'm facing it in multiple ways just because of what I represent. So when I think about that, I'm thinking of allyship, even in my communities, all around. And what do I want people to do? I want you to be the voice when I'm not around. I want you to also have the knowledge of who you're speaking of and making sure that you are creating inclusive spaces. And one of the biggest things for me as a wheelchair user, if you're an ally, let's start making sure that we got ramps everywhere. Let's start making sure that things are accessible to all, and I think that those are things that can make you where that you might not understand me, but you can get me in that room. And you can get me in that room by changing the infrastructure and development. You can change things when it comes to, awareness just in the structure of, cities and environments. Those are starts, but I think that using your voice when we aren't around is a start, and educating yourself. There's a lot of, I feel like all of us on this panel have amazing platforms, and social media gives you the opportunity to search a hashtag about a different disability. And if you do that, you can educate yourself a lot, because we're really raising awareness for what we represent, and we're spreading it out very proudly. So you can know that, we're not ashamed of who we are. So I just think, yeah, I know I gave a little bit, but I get excited when we come to that. So this is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. I'm going to use what you said, Wesley, to segue to our next question, because you talked a lot about accessibility. So it's often said, especially in our community, that accessibility is the key to dismantling ableism. Do you agree with that? Or do you think that there's more to it than that?
I was trying to let somebody else talk, but do me a quick, can you repeat that question again, Catherine? This is Wesley, done speaking.
This is Catherine, absolutely. Some often say, especially in our community, that accessibility is the key to dismantling ableism. Do you agree that accessibility is the key, or is it only a piece of the puzzle? Is there more to it than that?
Oh yeah. So this is Wesley back speaking. I would say that it's a small piece, right? Like I think that accessibility should just be there. It doesn't just help the disabled community. It helps all. It helps able-bodied people that might get an injury that's temporary. It helps the elderly. So I think when you're thinking of accessibility and thinking that it would dismantle ableism as a whole, you're wrong. I think that it can just be a start. It's getting us in the room. But what happens when we're in the room? And that's where the other things start to transpire. I think that the stigmas has to be broken for us to really dismantle ableism. And it starts in, all the way into the school systems, right? So I think that, but again, like I said, I think it would be a start. It's a small piece to the puzzle that we're trying to fix, but there's no way that you can create a accessible anything and think that you're doing like you just fully completed defeating ableism. Because people have their own thoughts, their own biases, and they have to face those as well and not just change. I mean, we look at accessibility now, and the lack of it is just lack of awareness and understanding. What is a minimum to ADA minimum is not, I always tell people, ADA compliant is not ADA convenient. And a lot of people only focus on what the books tell them and not living the experience of what we actually need. So we're still pushing up steep ramps and so on, even though other people might think that that's actually beneficial for us, and it's not. So I would just say that it's a start. We would love it, but yeah, it's so much more work to be done. This is Wesley done speaking.
This is Catherine. Jacob, can you give your 2 cents on this one? You haven't spoken in a little bit, so I'm gonna I'm gonna highlight you for a second.
No problem. I think access is a universal term. I was actually creating a video on this on my YouTube channel and creating a little bit of a documentary of what does access really mean. And I put it out to my community on social media. And what happened was I created a conversation between 2 different worlds, which is something that Haben touched on earlier, was cross-section experiences. And what I call it is walking into worlds. It's something that I experienced for a lot of my life too. So I really resonated with what she said. And a lot of people defined access very differently. Some of them viewed it as educational opportunities. Other people viewed it as job opportunities. Other people viewed it as biases, like Wesley just talked about. But these people were people who are from different backgrounds, whether they had disabilities or not. They were all experiencing the word access very, very differently. And so it was creating a conversation. And I think that's probably the very first primary step to dismantling what you consider ableism, is creating that conversation, because once you have conversation, then you begin to have understanding. Once you have understanding, you have empathy. Now we have super good connections and we can build off of that. ADA compliance is one part of the puzzle. I don't think it's I think it's a tiny piece, because I think in order to create more inclusion, there has to be a conversation for everyone, everybody at the table, all minorities, all different backgrounds. That creates, I think, a more inclusive, a more accessible world. So I view access as a more universal term that affects every one of us. And to be frank, we all grow old. Some of us, we're all going to be old at some point, and somebody's going to be calling us for some help at one point in time. Like, how do you do this? I'll be like, well, let me tell you the key. I'm going to change your life right now. It's good stuff. But I think that that's just one part of the puzzle. And that's what I have to say. I'm done speaking. Thank you.
This is Catherine speaking. Carly, did you have?
Yeah, I had something to say, and we talked a bit about this one just before we came on live. I wanted to talk about how Haben has helped me bring something more accessible into the world. So I wrote a book in 2019. It was released at the start of 2019. And I'm absolutely grateful for a very big publisher to give me a book deal and to work with them. It was amazing. But one thing I found hard was having to advocate for access for me, but mostly for my readers, as well as, you know, promoting the book. I think there's a balance of not getting too annoyed when access isn't provided, but also, you know, being very polite to booksellers and event organizers. And I found that just how few people in the publishing industry knew what accessibility meant around events, around bookstores, around venues. As an Australian memoirist, I have a profile here in Australia through writing for the media, but I don't have a very big profile overseas. And so it's very hard to get published overseas, you know, as an Australian memoirist. So I had asked my publisher if we could have it in all sorts of formats so that it's accessible. So the book is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and also print on demand in large fonts. And that was available in those formats in Australia, and it was available in some different formats overseas, but not all. And Haben emailed me or messaged me on Instagram and said, "Hey, Carly, I really want to read your book, but I can't." And that was about a year and a half after it was published. So probably about mid last year, I would say, August last year. And so Haben told me the format that she needed, which is an ebook format, which at that moment wasn't available overseas. And she couldn't have a paperback, she couldn't have an audiobook. So I emailed my publisher, who is great, and I said, Haben is an amazing deafblind lawyer, and she really wants, and she's an author herself, and wants to read this book. What can you do about making it accessible? And within a week, it was accessible. After I asked for accessibility, it was granted, and it took accessibility for me to be able to reach that new market. And so now it's available in all formats worldwide, and it's amazing. And so it's much more now than accessibility. It means new markets, and it means breaking down the ableism as well. So thank you, Haben. And I think that it's shown that it's not that hard to make a book available overseas, it seems. So yeah.
This is Catherine. So we've talked a little bit about ableism itself, and I want to talk about the other side of this, which is inspiration culture. And I want to pose this first question to Carly and Haben, because I think your unique experiences might speak to this question really uniquely. So do you consider inspiration culture its own form of ableism, or do you find it more to be well-meaning and possibly misplaced allyship?
I can start. Haben speaking. So ableism exists in many forms, and whether you dress it up with sugar or hats and other costumes, it's still going to be ableism. And sometimes people dress up ableism with the word inspiration. So the word itself is not the problem. It's the context that can be problematic. I love the word inspiration when it's connected to action. So if someone says, I'm inspired to make my book accessible in an ebook format so that deafblind people and other people can read it around the world, that's excellent. I love that kind of inspiration. But if it's someone is saying, you inspire me because, gosh, I'm so glad I don't have your miserable life, that is not helpful. And unfortunately, a lot of times when people say inspiration, they're talking about negative, pity-based inspiration, which is not real inspiration. It's ableism in disguise. So it's not so much the word, but the context. So when we say inspiration culture, it can be confusing. We do want to inspire people to make their books accessible, their websites accessible. We want to inspire people to learn about ableism and dismantle it. But sometimes ableism sneaks into those stories and into those conversations and becomes a destructive force disguised in a way that fools a lot of people. So beware of ableism. Look out for its disguises.
Absolutely, Harbin. It's Carly speaking. And I think that this discussion came about after we had a bit of a discussion on Instagram. And I went back to have a look at your post that I commented on, where you were saying that you were told that you have to stop being engaging in politics, but be more inspirational. And you said that you will not stop talking about politics because you can't separate that from your identity. And I said that we can't separate disability, identity, and politics, and nor can we perform being inspirational on command, because I think we're expected to do that. We're expected to be nice, and we're expected to be not angry when things happen, like when ableism happens to us. Even within the disability community, there's disabled people who tell me that I shouldn't be so angry when discrimination happens, because that might be the only encounter someone ever has with a disabled person, which is ridiculous, because if we are meant to be everyone's life lesson, and then how do we live our own lives? And it is a dangerous narrative when people just expect us to inspire them and put their life into perspective. Does anyone else have anything to say on that?
Oh, yes, this is Wesley. I'm like, I was just waiting, but I mean, because I'm in the fitness industry, right? And I never worked out till I acquired my disability. So, of course, for me, it was motivating for me to get out and do more than what limits people have put on me. But after a while, all people would say is that I was an inspiration. And I'm like, but I'm just pushing myself. I'm pushing myself daily. And it got to a point where I stopped doing certain things because that was all people thought I could do. And I think someone told me one day that, when people are looking at those with disabilities, they're just like Haven said, right? Like if you, when it comes to inspiration and it comes to the fact that, people are looking at you where they don't want to be in your shoes per se, right? Like they don't want to live your struggles. They don't want to have your defeat. So for them, it is inspiring because they have already had their own perception of what they would do or how they would be in your position. And so for me, it was always people telling me, oh man, like, yeah, man, Wes, this is good. But then it would end with, I don't know what I would do if I was in a wheelchair, or I don't know what I could do if I was in that position for the rest of my life. And so, and then again, it would go back to, but I love what you're doing. It's so inspiring. And to me, we use the term inspirational porn. And that's exactly eventually what it was that I started to feel, and I started to get away from. Now, I do share a lot of my workout videos, but I don't as much as I used to, because I wanted people to understand what my real identity was. And it wasn't the things that they found inspiring. If you couldn't see my day-to-day just living as something that was motivating to you, and like separating what inspiration is, right? Like now, if I get on stage and I go deliver a powerful message, well, I'm going to go inspire, right? Like, and so if you find that inspirational, great. But I think that having those terms and what it does is it creates that social construct of how people already see us. And so the only thing that you can do, I seen something in the chat where someone said, I'm gonna give you a little name bomb, but someone said, it's just like someone seeing, their baby get CI and then the parents make a video and cry over it. It's really the fact that people don't want to see themselves in our position. That's how it is. And so everything that they see as overcome, in a sense, right, from their own points of views, their own opinions, it becomes inspiration to them. And I think that is embedded in ableism, because we're all human. And just because you can see my limitations doesn't mean that you don't have any of your own. And so I think that, again, people are so quick to make themselves where that they are more than us, and not just looking at us from an empathetic point of view and being, I'm big on motivated, or, I don't even like inspiration too much anymore, because it's been used in such a wrong term when it comes to our community. And I like what Carly said, we're just trying to live our lives. How can we live if you're always looking at the thing we have to do is inspiring? And it becomes something that for our community, you start to see yourself as superhuman instead of just human, because you have to go out and make yourself look perfect for the rest of the world, even though you have your good and bad days. And I think that, again, that's where the ableism comes in, and it kind of defeats the fact of the inspiration. So this is Wesley. I'm going to say, don't call me inspiring. If you're motivated by things I do, that is great. But just know that I'm doing this just to make myself better and to make and impact other people's lives, to show them what they can, that's possible, because the social constructs have always been debilitating for this community before I acquired my injury and even after. So this is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. All of your thoughts on that are phenomenal. This question, I'm gonna point this one towards Daniel and Jacob. And this one's gonna be a hard one, so I apologize already. So, as we're talking about inspiration culture, several of the people that have attended have spoken to this, and it's something that we all see. We see, videos go viral of people with disabilities doing something that is considered inspirational to the non-disabled world, and so on and so forth. And while that is something that we are trying to dismantle, those kinds of situations also provide our community with double-edged opportunities to use that as a platform to speak to a larger conversation about the very thing that we're trying to dismantle. So how do we as a community grapple with the double-edged nature of inspiration culture that is also at the same time unacceptable, but also in a way giving us the platform by which to have this conversation?
This is Daniel, and thankfully, thank goodness, I was actually kind of contemplating this as I was hearing the other panelists speak. So this isn't as difficult as it could have been. I think, as we examine different things, like I hope that if someone with Ehlers-Danlos comes across some of the stuff I share on social or the things my organization does, they rethink what a person with chronic pain and chronic fatigue can do. I hope they start to ask themselves, what can I do in my life that will give me enough purpose and enough motivation that it can get me out of bed in the morning and make dealing with the pain worth it. I hope in general, as people see those of us with disabilities who are trying to go out and live our best lives, that it helps people on that progression that we were talking about earlier really re-examine their own internal ableism. And unfortunately, that does come at the cost of people taking that message and turning it in a way it's never intended to be. The same employer who might get inspired and completely detach their role as a boss or a manager could also attach and scaffold that knowledge into their role and be more encouraged to hire someone with a disability in a role that they couldn't otherwise perceive them doing, based on what they learn and the way that they process that knowledge and decide to set aside their assumptions. So I think it is a really delicate balance. We have to, unfortunately, those of us who choose to really be out in the world and try to live publicly, we do unfortunately get to deal with that side of it, where, you know, some days are better than others. But I think we can also examine it, or we can also look at it as a blessing to be able to say, hey, hopefully we can find someone who our story helps get past that next hurdle. Hopefully we can do enough good that it makes it worth it when it comes to the things that we wish weren't out there. For me, it is. It's a conscious decision I made. It's a conscious decision I think a lot of, if not all of our panelists have made. But it is something we have to remember is our own conscious choice. And hopefully our allies will also remember it's a conscious choice and that we don't always want to be on display. This is Daniel, and I'm done with that thought.
This is Catherine speaking. Thank you so much for that thought. I know that was a really complicated question to ask. So I'm very glad that you were kind of pondering it as we were talking. Before I get to you, Jacob, I was just reminded that Haben is leaving us early. And so I wanted to get any final thoughts that she had for us before she has to leave for the evening.
And I'm leaving for accessibility reasons because it's difficult on my wrists and hands to be doing this for more than an hour. So I asked to be here for an hour. We ultimately can't control how other people will feel. We can control our own messages. We can get better at crafting messages, stories, written and visual, that move people. And we can work at removing ableism from our own stories because it sometimes accidentally comes in, since we're living in a world swimming with ableism. But it's an ongoing process. It might never be perfect, but just as we don't expect perfect allies, we can't really expect perfection from our own selves. And we should also have compassion for ourselves as we work on crafting stories that move people, but also help people move away from ableism.
This is Catherine speaking. Thank you so much for being here with us, Haben, and for sharing such insightful thoughts about ableism and inspiration and what it means for our community and abroad.
This is Jacob speaking. If that wasn't a mic drop, I don't know what was.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
This is Jacob speaking, and now I have to follow that up. Thank you very much. To answer the earlier question of inspiration culture and how it affects the perspective of the world around us, I understand where you're coming from as far as how social media picks and chooses what kind of messages they want to promote, and things of that nature. And it's not our choice. Social media, unfortunately, is a privately owned entity. They can do what they want with the stuff that they have. If we choose to use those platforms, that's our own prerogatives. I will say that when it comes to picking and choosing those people, right, how they decide to deploy on their own platforms is also their own choice, right? So if that person decides to walk in a straight line from point A to point B, and it does something for that person, and it's very empowering for them, and it brings them joy and happiness in their life and fulfillment, who am I to say that that's a bad thing? Because if it provides them with something that they're missing or lacking in their life, maybe that's a healthy thing for them. And as they continue to go forward and they try to expand and evolve their own platforms, and they're actually providing a action to the community, as Haben would put it. If it's inspiration that leads to action, that's really empowering. That's good things that come from it. I do know a few of those people. I think that they have grown exponentially since I've followed them from where they were to where they are now. It's an evolving process, especially when you grow on a platform extensively fast. I think Wesley can attest to this. Carly can attest to this. When you grow very fast in a very short amount of time, things change very, very quickly. But how you handle it, how you evolve is what really matters. And I think that that's the most important thing. Evolution is really what's important here. And also, though, at the same time, if they decide they want to use their platform for what it got them there, that's their platform. They can do what they want with it. And if it provides them with joy and happiness and fulfillment, and they have a community around them that also provides that, and it inspires them to take action, can't really find fault in that. Now, if it's unhealthy action, if it's damaging action, that's a different story entirely. I'm Jacob, and I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. Thank you so much for that perspective. Carly, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think what Jacob said about growing on the platform, on your social platform or media can be really tricky. And I guess my own ableism here in how disabled people are conditioned to feel about inspiration has meant that we often automatically reject the term inspiration or inspiring, despite what that person is doing or their intent. And when I first saw Wes on Queer Eye, I admit I was seeing it from a very edited perspective. And so my first thought was around inspiration and around how perhaps the editors had created that narrative. And so right now I'm so thankful to have Wes, in his own words, where he's more than the 45-minute TV show. And I think that's really important, that we are in control of our own narratives, and sure, use the media and other people's platforms to launch from, but be true to our own story as well, to change that way that people see us. I hope that isn't hurtful to you, Wes, because that's not my intention. It's more so that we're often spun a story and we really need own voices.
This is Catherine speaking. You are absolutely 100% on point with that, Carly. Thank you for that. I have one final question for the panelists today before we move on to our audience Q&A session. And it is, what do we as activists and allies and people with disabilities that take action every single day want people to walk away from this conversation today as far as taking action on ableism? What would each of you like to see people be able to walk away from this session today feeling empowered to do, to change the conversation about ableism and inspiration for our community and our allies?
This is Daniel. I'll go ahead and start it off. In short, do a little better. We can all do a little better. We can all set aside an assumption. We can all ask another question. We can all learn from each other, both disabled and non-disabled, and we can broaden, deepen, and just completely innovate the conversation. I think going beyond that step, if we understand that ableism is a reality that is ever present, but also something that if we work together, we can create a seismic shift. If we understand that the underlying biases and structural issues we face, regardless of whatever disability we may identify with, blind, deaf, mobility, chronic illness, whatever, if we understand that deep down, the stigmas, the misconceptions are very similar, and we use that to our advantage and say, hey, you have a different experience on the surface than I do, but we've had the same questions, we've had the same doubts. Let's work together and really synthesize the insights that we've gained. What a difference we can make. So I think at the end, there's hope, there's a ton of room for progress. And if we can collaborate and work together on this and be, as Haben said earlier, be good to ourselves. Recognize we're not going to get it right today or tomorrow, but we can surely get closer. If we can really internalize those narratives within ourselves and then project those within our sphere of influence, we can create an incredible impact. And this is Daniel and I'm speaking.
Yes, this is Wesley. I'm really just going to piggyback off of Daniel, and I feel like Haben said it so perfectly. Yeah, one of my affirmations I say every day is I am a work in progress, and I've come to understand that my progress never ends. I can always do better, I can always do more, and I can always help. And so for me, that's me recognizing that I can make progress within myself every day. I can learn more, but I can always help someone else find that inside of them as well. And then the same thing as Jacob and Carly, creating your own narrative. Because sometimes, you do find us as public figures and have large platforms, and it can be that it looks good, but to really understand who you are is where that peace and that growth can come in. And I feel like for me, I'm able to move the way I do because I am determined to always create my own narrative, because I've lived a life with someone trying to create it for me for so long. And I think that when we create our own narrative and write our own stories, I always tell people, it's like, don't try to accept the way the world sees you. Create your own story, create your own narrative, and let the world accept that. And so for me, if we can make sure that we create our own narrative, well, then we have people that will perceive things differently because we're not defined by the interpretations that they want to define us by. We're not who that they want us to be, but now they grab power and motivation from our stories and be able to carry that on to the next person. But it's all about, really doing some self-reflection and really understanding that you can always grow, right? Like, again, I was 9 years ago, right? I don't like to do up my age all the time, but 9 years ago, I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, and it wasn't until I was around other people that were different than me that I understood exactly how creating your own narrative and being proud can share those stories and empower communities like our own. So I look at those that are able, those that are allies. And I just say that, pursuing someone to create their own narrative, you might show them my platform, but that doesn't mean they have to be me. because that can be debilitating as well. So giving them strength and power to be able to just write their own story. If we all write our own stories, if we all create our own narratives, then we can guide this world into a better place, because everybody's different. Every disability is different. What I feel is different than everybody else, but I'm pretty sure we all feel something. And so it's empathy. If we move with empathy and move with a little bit more integrity, then we can become a better world. This is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. Does anybody else from our panelists have any thoughts on that question before we move to our attendee questions? I know we have several people that have submitted questions that I would really like to get to.
It's Carly. Sorry, I've been coughing. I've got my first cold since the pandemic. It's been hard to manage after a year of being relatively healthy. I think that one of the hardest things I've had to deal with in my disability advocacy work has been the criticism and the hurt and the lateral violence from other disabled people. And I feel that we're not allowed to have individual success. I feel that we are not allowed to tell our own stories. Because, hang on, I'll type it.
Okay, I would like to add one more thing. This is Jacob speaking. I'll be quick. The one thing I would like to have people take away from this chat today with all these amazing humans, which I'm very honored to share the stage with, is to be free from fear. What does that mean? I'm going to take it down to a very base level and harken it back to my childhood days. I always wanted to meet everybody on the playground, and people were always a little bit nervous to come and say hi to me. And I realized that people may not always understand what's happening, and we have a tendency to fear what we don't understand. And I'm a very friendly person. I would love to meet you. I would like to just come and shake your hand and become friends with you and say hello. So make that connection with that human. Move with empathy, as Wesley said. Don't be afraid. Don't have any fear. We're human beings. We have eyes, ears, hearts, mouths. We all have emotions and feelings. And so be free of fear. And it's okay. That's all I wanted to say. And I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. That is a perfect response. So very wonderful and eloquent way to end this portion of our chat. So I'm going to stop that here before I ruin it for everybody. Let's thank you again for all the panelists for being here. We're so grateful for you guys. We're going to move on to some attendee questions. We've had several people typing away throughout the chat as we've been talking about this topic. And I wanted to pose a few of those questions to you guys today. We don't have time to get to all of the questions today, but for those that are attending, I wanted to let you all know that in our community, our Facebook community, the Diversability community in Facebook, which will be, I'll put a link in the chat I encourage you to join, and there will be a post later on today for you to continue the conversation, and we will be posting all of the questions that were asked by attendees today to continue having this conversation about ableism and inspiration, which isn't just confined to the hour and a half that we have here. We would love to continue having conversations with you about what it means and what questions you might have. And with that being said, let's go ahead and pose a couple of those questions for you guys before we switch it over. So I wanted to ask this question of, let's see. Sorry. Oh, this one is a really good one. I wanted to pose this question to Daniel and Wesley. we have a question from an attendee that asks, can anyone speak to rural versus urban aspects of ableism? And I know both of you have done quite a bit of traveling, so I want to know your perspective on this. Are they different? Are they the same? If they are different, how so? And I am done speaking.
Well, this is Daniel. You know, this is kind of funny because I've lived in places as big as Baltimore or the suburbs of Seattle, and I've lived in places as rural as Mansfield, Missouri, which has a grand total of 1,000 residents. And currently I'm in Springfield, Missouri. I forgot to mention that earlier in my intro. I think there is a lot of fear, going back to Jacob's point. There's a lot of fear when it comes to, if I have a disability, particularly one that affects mobility, or or one that requires a driver, a private vehicle, can I get by in a rural setting? Access is a very big concern. And I think sometimes there are legitimate hurdles we have to get by, but there are also times where if we reach out and if we get creative, we can make a life wherever we choose to live. But going back to the core of your question, sometimes people in urban settings versus rural settings still have different dispositions on a lot of things. So maybe ableism or just a lack of knowledge may manifest differently. But I think a lot of times at the core of it, it's simply just not understanding some of the very basic questions or the basic concerns, or not feeling empowered to ask their questions. A lot of times people who would want to be allies are afraid to ask the questions of how we do things, or how we go about living our lives, or our dreams or aspirations, in fear of doing the wrong things. And I think it manifests differently in urban or rural settings, but there's a lot of common threads. So I hope that kind of gets back to a sensible answer, and I'm done speaking.
Yes, this is Wesley. At least from a lot of my work and a lot of my travels going to rural areas, what I have found is that ableism exists a lot because the demographic of people with disabilities are so low. And so if the numbers of the population is low, then sometimes you might only have one or two people. And so if that, and I found that there's more stigmas based around it, because a lot of people in those areas are kind of, they kind of stick to their own way or their own narrative and direction, compared to like an urban setting where there's so much going on, so much innovation, things are constantly rising, things are constantly growing. And so with that, there is more knowledge, like, what Daniel was saying of certain areas might have a lack of knowledge of certain things. And, you think about the rural areas, some people might not even watch TV. And, so yeah, the perception's different. And then, of course, for me, I'm a city boy, and I just know that even, locally here in my city, the ableism that we face here is different, just because of the structures, right? How we talked about accessibility and access earlier, as Jacob was mentioning. And so I think that there's a huge difference for sure, but at the same time, I think it all comes with numbers and the awareness that is stressed within that part. Yeah, this is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Daniel. Can I throw in one more quick thought? One thing that I did want to mention that I forgot to is, if you are those of us who deal with rare diseases, it is incredibly hard to find specialists in rural settings who are knowledgeable of our conditions, and it is equally difficult to get transportation to major treatment facilities or medical facilities that have a more modern understanding of rare diseases. So that is a concern that is disproportionately affecting those who live in rural settings. This is Daniel, and I'm done speaking.
And it's Carly. I grew up in rural Australia and I live in the city now. I definitely agree there with what you said, Daniel, about hard to find specialists. I used to travel, 4 hours at a time for a hospital appointment and then have to stay in hospital, between 1 and 3 weeks away from my family, which would mean that my mum would usually come down and have to upend her life for those 2 to 3 weeks. That's hard. And I also see now with friends who live rurally that the public transport systems are really bad. They've got fewer trains that are accessible, fewer buses, and that don't run regularly either. And then there's also the divide with the internet access as well. In Australia, there's still parts that don't have fast internet or good mobile phone coverage. So there's that. And so when we are all connected via social media, it can be hard when people don't have that access as well.
This is Catherine speaking. Thank you guys for those answers to that question. Let's move on to the next attendee question that we have. We got a question from an attendee that said, I participated in a program as a teenager with many others with diverse disabilities. It made me a little more aware of equity, but maybe also caused me to stress that we all have disabilities thinking left me striving to pass rather than uniting with others. What do others think about the we all have disabilities mindset? And this is Catherine Dunn speaking.
It's Cully. I think that people who say that perhaps aren't aware of the social model of disability, where society is the disabling barrier, not our bodies. And I also feel like that statement minimizes disability, the impact of disability, both in terms of the impairment and the discrimination we face. So, yeah. Oh, I don't understand. Someone sent me a message. Is my mic on or off? Oh, someone said 100. Sorry, couldn't see that emoji. Yeah, I think that it absolutely minimizes it. And I find it hilarious that when people try and relate to my impairment, they'll say, oh, I get dry skin, or I know exactly what it's like. And, they'll tell me about a relative that's got a very minor skin condition. And they try and empathize, but that's not helpful because I absolutely know they've not experienced a severe skin condition. Yeah, I'm done talking.
Yeah, this is one of those things. This is Wesley. This is one of those things that, over time, I think that someone kind of, I heard someone say this, and it was the good way. It's like when you hear someone sharing their story and talking about their disability, don't go behind them and share a story that is relatable in your own mind, because then it does take away that person and what power and strength and awareness they're trying to bring to that conversation as a whole. But also, I think that when we, especially now there's so many talks around disability. And so I think that it just comes with understanding and knowledge, and us being able to push out more of what that, like Carly said, what's that social construct of like how it is determined, what is debilitating within the community. Because if that's pushed out more, then some people will be more aware of what disability is, and be able to not try to disvalue it just by saying like, something that could be similar, right? Like, I feel like it's hard for me to I'm still learning about everything that's out here. And so, you know, I have come and worked with people that have invisible disabilities, whether it's a TBI, right? And, or they have other type of issues, and you might not see it until they say it. Or I've met people that have, you know, basically due to ableism, have found a way to create a norm in within their disability. And when they get to start to share it, it becomes something that, you know, a lot of people are confused about or don't want to, you know, believe and things like that. So I would say that it takes a lot of understanding and awareness of what's in our community and what does that all entitle, but also if people can know more of what that social construct is, I think then that way people can understand what our voices are being used for to raise awareness and what platforms that we're speaking for. Because of course I can't, you know, we could talk race and we can talk all these other things, but that doesn't mean that everyone doesn't have their own experience. And so I think, again, it goes back to the create your own narrative. And I think that if people start to create their own narrative, then more voices will be heard instead of being lessened. This is Wesley, I'm done speaking.
You're absolutely right about that. I want to pose the next question to Jacob first. But this is kind of a general question. We had an attendee ask, I'm keen to hear what panelists' approaches are to managing communication with people who are gatekeepers to access. How do you overcome microaggressions like you don't look disabled, or I lost my place, I'm so sorry, or you have an invisible disability, or so on and so forth? How do you overcome those microaggressions when having conversations about access?
This is Jacob speaking. This is a good question because I often get told that statement often. You don't look like you have a disability. And it's something that I've grown up with. I've grown accustomed to it. Microaggressions are real, but you have to play chess, not checkers. And you have to be able to anticipate the moves and you have to see them coming, especially in the business world. As an entrepreneur, I think we all in this space can talk a little bit more about that, how maybe we don't get the contracts that we're looking for sometimes, and we have to go out and get them. We have to go out and advocate for them. We have to know our worth. I think that's one thing that we can do more of, is promoting the message of know your worth, know your self-worth. And that's a really good way to kind of negate microaggression, but you can also kill them with kindness too. I used to approach it with, if somebody were to say, you don't look disabled, I actually would say thank you, because I felt like they were actually seeing the human portion of me rather than the disability portion of who I was. But it was kind of messed up. That was a growth. That was kind of like the growing part of my life. But that was just a simple way that I kind of used kindness to kind of shift that narrative and create my own narrative, to quote Wesley. And yeah, but that's what I would say about handling microaggressions. You can use kindness. You also need to play chess, not checkers, and just anticipate. If you can anticipate, then you become a leader. And my name is Jacob, and I'm done speaking.
Carly, can you give us a little bit of insight on your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that there's a need. I sometimes see there's a disability hierarchy, and people tell me that if they've got an invisible disability, they've got it far worse than a visible disability. And then people that say that have a visible disability often say they've got it worse than people who have an invisible disability. I think we have to perhaps reframe that thinking and see the social barriers, and also know that every experience of disability is valid. In my personal experience of disability, while I am very red and I look like I'm sunburnt. So there is an assumption that I'm often in pain. There's also the assumption that I'm not in pain because it's just sunburn and it'll go away and I don't really need a seat on the train. And so I think we all have to understand, and we talked about meeting those people where we're at earlier, but understand that everybody's experience as a disability is different and that we all have elements that aren't necessarily visible. And it's not a competition about who has it worse. I mean, I find the Oppression Olympics quite difficult at times because it's like people are always competing for who has it worse or who has, the greater access need. And I don't know whether that's helpful for anyone. I think we need to respect each other's experiences. And I need to cough. Sorry.
I really appreciate what Carly just said. This is Jacob speaking. I had to jump in there. Highly, highly respected. Oppression Olympics. That made me laugh and smile. That was a really good spin on it.
Yes, no, Carly hit it on the nose. I just wanted to piggyback and kind of amplify that. It is, I see all the comments. The Olympic comment was, it was gold. But, microaggressions and things are going to be there. I've had to feel them and endure them as a Black man in America. I can't speak on any other experiences anywhere else, but the intersectionality of disabilities is serious, and when you think about those things, just like Jacob said, you play chess, not checkers. You have to understand that everyone's not going to be you. Everyone's not going to have the awareness that you have. Everyone's not going to have the positivity that you have. Have empathy or integrity that you have. The thing is that we can set an example. The world is not people have their own views. And so, but again, we can set the example. We lead by example. We lead by create our own narratives. And when we are in positions where that we are facing the microaggressions, or like for some people that I've had to work with where it's like, oh, you don't look disabled enough, or like Carly said, it's like, oh, it's just you're not going through pain. Like, people don't know you. They can have their own views on what they think, but opinions are opinions. And so when it comes to that, you again have to create your own narrative and be the voice for yourself. That voice does not have to come in a negative sense. Like Jacob said, kill them with kindness. Kindness is the most amazing thing that you can do, because when you let people know that they're and you pinpoint their ignorance and what they're saying, well, it's something that puts them back on a back burner and they have to go back and reflect on themselves. I always tell people that when your views are negative toward me, when your views aren't accepting of what I'm telling you, that's because you have your own issues that you need to face, that you need to fix. Once I was able to accept who I was and start to focus on myself and have that self-love and create that narrative, well, then all that loud noise, I was able to quiet it down. It didn't really faze me, and I have to face things. I mean, well, you see my shirt. Like I always tell people, if I'm in my car, I'm seeing for the color of my skin before I'm seeing for my disability. And because of that, I do have to face things. I feel sometimes like I'm pleading out to someone to say, but I have people waiting on me just to get out my car. And I'm like, man, I don't drive a van, and I'm not knocking anyone in a wheelchair that does. But I'm like, is that the way that you see us? Right? Like, is that the way that defines who I am? If you see me in this position outside of me pulling up in a car that I drive. And I've had to I actually made a tag that says disabled AF. And it's on the front of my tag so people can quit asking questions, because I'm like, yes, no. But again, I'm just killing them with my own type of kindness, because I'm tired of it, but I do want to push forward and change that narrative. Social media is our leverage right now. Social media is giving us the opportunity to actually share with people and defeat those microaggressions, but it's up to you to share your story so someone else can be educated. Because once you can do that, it creates a ripple effect. And that loud noise that's out there, people that have the microaggressions, people that have their own views, well, that's where the allyship comes in. If you're starting to understand and learn, well, now you can be that voice to tell someone else, and it's simple. Hey, you can't say that. Or, hey, no, actually, you don't know that person, and they could really be going through something, but it's something that you visually can't see. And those are things that sometimes lack of education or knowledge, and we know that the systems that have been built haven't been really ineffective educating people of all things around. There are people with undiagnosed disabilities right now, and so where do you come with that when they're trying to explain to someone else, how they're feeling, how they're operating? It's hard. So again, it just comes with us being able to educate, but kill it with kindness. Don't be the negative person that they already perceive you to be. Be the person that you can say, okay, I get your point of view. It's up to me to change some things or educate you now, or just kill it with kindness in the sense that, all right, well, thank you. That's how you see me. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and move on because I know exactly what I'm going through. But I think that you have to, I will always say it. It's all about creating your own identity. And when you can create your own identity, you can educate more and more people so that they can understand who you are and understand that you might not be the only one. This is Wesley. I'm done speaking.
This is Daniel.
Oh, Daniel, there you go. Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to add in here, kind of bringing this back to where we were at the beginning. We have got to do a better job in the disability space in general, also for recognizing those of us that are dealing with an intersection of a visible and an invisible disability simultaneously. I can't tell you how many times I have felt inferior because maybe I don't walk as fast, or I don't feel like I have as good white cane skills as my blind peers, or other similar struggles where we need to acknowledge that we are still human beings. Sometimes we have one thing, sometimes we have multiple, sometimes they're visible or invisible. And if we can reach out to one another and learn from one another, we can, I think, decrease the overall prevalence of microaggressions just based off of having better communications and a more inclusive and accepting environment within our own community, which will model the behavior we want to have outside of our community. I'm done speaking.
This is Catherine speaking. Thank you guys so much for your answers to these questions and for agreeing to be panelists for this evening. We are unfortunately out of time. We've actually gone over our time a little bit, and in the interest of respecting everyone's time and resources and energy, we are going to go ahead and wrap things up for this evening. And to the attendees, thank you so much for coming tonight and joining us for this important conversation. Again, if you would like to continue the conversation, as we encourage you to do so, please join our Facebook community. There is a link in the chat, and there will be a post for you to continue to ask questions and engage with panelists and members of the Diversability team as we continue to have important conversations about how to dismantle ableism and grow in our learning as a community and make real impact. Before we do get off, though, I want to have the panelists do a group photo with me. We always like to do an post-event group photo. Daniel, would it be possible for you to turn your camera back on so that we can see your shining face?
Yeah, give me a second.
Okay.
Are we allowed to do goofy faces? Like, what's up?
How about we do one non-goofy and one goofy?
All right,
I'll make a deal with you. Okay. And for our attendees, while we're waiting for everyone to get set up, we will have a recording of this that will be sent out. We will have a copy of the chat and a transcript that will be added to the Facebook community files for you to access. And connect and get all of the resources that were shared in the chat today so that you can catch up on anything you may have missed. I know there was a whole lot of information talked about today, so we want to make sure that you can grab those morsels as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So Daniel, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So when everyone is ready, I have my camera prepared for the photo. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and then I'll do one. You can do whatever you want. This is the goofy one. 3, 2, 1, go. Okay. Thank you all so much for being here, attendees and panelists. We hope you will come to our next event. We have events monthly, and next month will be a community mixer. It'll be a little bit less formal. It'll be an opportunity to have attendees and panelists have a little bit more of an open conversation. And then keep in the loop. We encourage you to join all of our social media so that you can be the first to know about each one of our monthly events. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will see you next time. And I am done talking.
Bye, everyone. Have a good one.
Pleasure to meet you all.